turning the recording on. And then some students are still coming in. Give me a sec. All right, so as I was saying, I'm sharing the calendar right now. And basically, I want to remind you today is December 1st, the last lecture. We're just going to cover, some miscellaneous topics that we have left from the course syllabus. So I've gone over the syllabus just to make sure that I didn't miss anything. And, pretty much today we should wrap up everything. And then on December 3rd, on Thursday, it's just an open lab. So you can work on I expect you to work on the term project. If you want to show me the project that day, just before you actually do your formal presentations on December 8th, you can do that if you have any questions. So use that day basically to work on the project as much as possible. And then as you know, December 8th, a week from today, at this time, you will do your presentation. So we'll use this medium of Zoom. We can share screens, do the break. Well, we did this for the crypto practical. The only difference is you'll do this for the whole class, right? So it's a presentation for everyone this time around. And remember, you must demo. It's not just slides and talking about a topic. You have to demo. And so we've discussed some of your topics already. And then finally, the final exam will be during finals week. Okay, so that's during finals week. So that if you go to Google, you should be seeing Google now. Yeah. All right, and you go to PNW final exam schedule. Right, you can see there for the fall 2020 final exam schedule. So we meet on Tuesday, so that's Tuesday and Thursday. The class starts at 4, so that's Tuesday and Thursday, 4 p.m. That's when the class starts. Therefore, your exam will be on Tuesday, 5 to 7 p.m., okay? So make a note of that. The exam, just like the other 2 exams, it'll be a written exam, comprehensive. It'll include everything that we've covered from beginning of the semester until what we covered today, basically, and actually including, there could be questions about the topics of your presentations, so make sure you attend those as well. All right, so that, again, I'll repeat, so the final exam, Tuesday, so class meets Tuesdays starting at 4, so the exam is on Tuesday, starting at 5 p.m., so December 15th, basically, this day is the day of your final exam. And then at that point, you will be done with everything. So you guys have submitted all your homework now. All you have left is, I'll create a Dropbox for the project where you can submit your slides, your report, just a simple, like a type lab report, and then the final exam. So really just those 2 submissions. I've gone over most of the grading on Brightspace. I'm almost done with it. So I'm hoping that by tomorrow, I will have wrapped up Brightspace, but I've graded a lot of it, so you can check your grades there. All right, so that's basically just the announcements that I wanted to make. All right, now that I've gone over the announcements, we can just get to the final topics, okay?
Professor?
Go ahead, please.
For our project demonstration, does it have to be in Linux or can it be in Windows?
It can be in Windows, but yeah, when you take 372, for instance, that's a Linux class here. It doesn't matter. I know I did a lot of things in Linux, but that's just because you guys are still have not taken 372. Once you take 372, you'll appreciate the Linux side. Any other questions?
One more question. Are we all submitting the document or do we just submit one copy?
Please submit that's a good question, actually. Everybody, please submit the report, even if it's the same report, just because it just makes it easier for me to grade. If I have to grade one and then I have to look for your name in the list, that way it's just easier. I remember that it was you, but by having the report in there, I don't have to. So everybody submit a copy. Be responsible and submit a copy of your report. Make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions?
I don't think so.
All right, guys. So as I said, that's basically, you know, we're done with the semester. Today is just going to be a very light, very relaxed class. You know, just wrap up some of the topics, some of the reading, you know, you can do on your own. These are easy topics like physical security. So today, you know, it shouldn't be a long lecture. And then, you know, we can leave the rest of the time just for questions. If you want to, any questions about the exam, etc., or anything else. Okay. All right. Everybody did really well, I want to say, on the scavenger hunt. So that was pretty, I know it was easy, but at the same time, it was easy because you knew all the topics. So I think everybody did well there. So that's good. All right. So let's then, as you can see, let's just kind of go over, right? So we did all the encryption topics, and I'm not going to talk about that today. We spent a lot of time this semester, right? And then I started with the risk assessment, really. Move this down. Okay, so really these are the topics that are at the end of the semester. So we've covered already the RCM, and there's only really one topic that I want to go back, or a couple of topics I want to go back to, just kind of make sure I covered those definitions. But the main objective of that RCM module that you should be seeing that actually. All right, so so the RCM, the risk and control matrix, right? We went over this. This had to do basically with understanding how to start a cybersecurity plan, right? And we went over those slides. Make sure you read through all the slides there. So if I click on this link, I went over the main idea of risk assessment, but make sure you read through the entire slides, okay? And really, both of these are very just, you know, they're not very technical slides, so they're just really things that you can easily read. So that's why I haven't really covered them. So I'll just say a few things of, oh, I didn't mean to do that. So let me open this one first. So I'm just going to say a few things about it, but this is the kind of thing that it's better if you just read it, honestly. All right, so this one, as you know, as we talk about, all right, good, there it is. Let me share it. Okay, so you should be seeing now these slides. So when we talk about the principles of information assurance and we want to maintain confidentiality, integrity, availability, all that of a computer system, obviously one thing to make sure is, well, make sure you lock the door of the data center, right? You know, obviously those are not technical things, but definitely, you know, they're important, right? They're, you know, we've all seen that Mission Impossible movie. I don't know if it was the first or the second one, where, you know, the actor, he gets into the ventilation systems and slips in with a cable and doesn't want to touch on the floor to steal a floppy disk, I think, or something like that, right? So we've all seen that movie, which was great, I'm sure entertaining, and that's what this is, right? So all of that, as you guys know about, you're very technical students, you know, about technology, IT, you know, we've covered all that, but obviously there is the whole physical security, the perimeter, all those things. So that's what these slides are about. So I'm not really going to talk about that. I mean, locking doors and things like that. So just go through these slides. I would recommend take a look at them. You know, they do talk a little bit about like weather and water damage. You can see chemical that, you know, even talks about like bugs, and dust. Certainly dust is a problem with computers because of the fans. All kinds of things, human caused threats. And then, some of the things, oh, there, I even have the picture, right? So, it's kind of funny, but that captures really well what this is about, right? So the physical of it, he's not actually, I think the only technical thing he did was figuring out the password, but everything else was just like very physical. So anyway, so that's, physical security basically. So make sure you take a look at it. These slides, it talks about perimeters and things like, don't worry too much about it, really. But just read through it. Obviously, it's pretty obvious what it is. There's some models here. The Bell-LaPadula. This used to be in the syllabus. I don't really see the point in. I'm going to take this out of the course. Those models, top secret and all that. So it doesn't really make much sense. But I mean, there's value in it. I mean, with Bell-LaPadula is the idea of like, secure documents, right? So basically, a system is defined as to be secure if the only permitted access modes of subjects to the objects are in accordance with some kind of security policy. And then this security policy, with the Bell-LaPadula model, is something kind of this. So I think it is, the simple security property, a subject at a given security level may not read an object at a higher security level, no read up. And that makes sense, right? So if you don't have the clearance, top secret or above, whatever, you can't really read a document. The other one that's a little bit more confusing is the other version of it, the read the star property of documents, and that's a subject at a given security level must not write to any object at a lower security level. So no write down. And I remember when I read this, it was confusing to me at first, but it does make sense, right? Because the idea is that the person who's doing the writing might have top clearance. And so they might talk about, a confidential, plan for some propulsion system or something. So they should not be writing that. So must not write to any object at a lower security. So you don't want to write it and then people with lower security level could read it, right? So that's kind of the idea. So this is sort of just wedged in here with physical security. It kind of relates to policies, but anyway, if you ever, I really don't know where to throw this, and I've been thinking about just, removing it, to be honest. But anyway, if you guys have interest in those things, that whole top secret idea, you can probably start there and take a look at it. It's a formal model. It's called a formal model of access control, and you can see that there. So hopefully you're seeing this, right? And so I've kind of explained the basic idea. And so the idea is you have subjects and objects, and then an object has a security classification and a subject has a security clearance. And then security classes control the manner in which a subject may access an object, right? And so that's kind of, so they, it goes into a lot of things, but this is just an example of this. All right, so that, that kind of is just a few, as I said, miscellaneous little topics that I have here and there. And, that also relate to the principles, confidentiality, integrity, and so on. Another topic that's important is security auditing. So let's take a look at this one. And as I said, I'm just, as I did with the previous one, I'm just kind of going over these little miscellaneous because they're mentioned in the syllabus. So security auditing is the idea that, to kind of to work with, work for all the principles of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, you want to have not just, restrictions, etc., but there's also as a mechanism of security, you have auditing. And auditing just basically means, looking at the data sort of after the fact. So here we have a definition of security audit. I guess, whenever you talk about risk management, if you think about cybersecurity, right? So cybersecurity didn't really exist before computers, right? So that's obvious. So there was no cybersecurity, back then, but we've always had information, right? So we've always had information. We always had records, right? We always had financial statements, in particular in companies. So for publicly traded companies, you have financial records. And so obviously information has existed, and there have been mechanisms of, minimizing risk to those documents, to not just to the confidentiality of the documents, but sometimes also to the integrity of them, which is a little bit more important, right? So that if a company reports something in their financial statements, they're correctly reporting it. So that kind of thing has always fallen within the idea of security auditing or auditing in general, right? Which is the process of people looking at things, information, and verifying its accuracy, correctness, right? So, that term from that area of finance and accounting and those fields has moved, obviously now, is integrated in IT and cybersecurity. So risk, so here, just a couple of terms. Security audit, the definition, is an independent review and examination of a system's records, right? Really the information. And activities to determine the adequacy of the system controls, right? To ensure compliance with established security policy and procedures. And basically with the goal of maintaining the pillars of information assurance. The basic objective is to establish accountability, right? And that's important so that you can always trace back. So for instance, like these voting systems that they keep talking about, right? These electronic voting systems. Well, it turns out the machines, I didn't know this, you enter the data and electronically it sends it to you. And that, that's how they know with the voting, how quickly, you can know that night, the results. But then it also prints out a little receipt, right? It prints out a little receipt. So there's this term that you've probably heard before called a paper trail. And so you have this document that you can always audit later, right? So that, whenever people say audits, they can, compare what's in the system, but also the physical printout. And apparently, I don't know if I understand correctly, when you press the button, that's like a physical thing and just punches out the receipt. So it's a physical system. All right. So anyway, so that's the idea with audit. Hopefully that makes sense. Keeping that paper trail and following it. So basically, the basic audit objective is to establish accountability for system entities that initiate, or participate in security relevant events and actions. So it means are needed to generate and record a security audit trail and to review and analyze the audit trail to discover and investigate attacks and security compromises. So nowadays, even though like in the voting systems, they need to be very, have a very good audit trail, right? So that's why they print out all these receipts. In IT in general, we don't really have paper trail, right? But everything is recorded. Everything is logged on a computer. So whenever you have this logging, log, so that's something when you guys take 372, for instance, which I believe half of you usually have taken it, half of you haven't. When you take that, so that's offered next semester, it's a Linux class. And in that course, but it also covers some sysadmin things. And so in that course, we'll talk about logging, syslog, and how to do that in Linux, how to do that with scripting. Python, etc. And so, yeah. Is there a question? All right, so the idea then, that's how you do it nowadays with computers, right? So there's always an audit trail, although it will be an electronic audit trail. Linux, for instance, Windows, they're very good at recording things. There's actually protocols, Syslog, et cetera, that are designed just for logging, because you don't want to log everything on the local machine. Sometimes you want to log it on a centralized machine. But, as you know, in the file system of Linux, for instance, there's a lot of, what is it? I think it's var log in that folder, and that's where you keep all the log files. So a security audit trail then becomes a chronological record of system activities that is sufficient to enable a reconstruction and examination of the sequence of environments and activities surrounding or leading to an operation, procedure, or event in a security relevant transaction. So again, just one of the last audit, as I said, could be an administrative thing, just looking at papers, could be electronic, automated, even looking at the log files, because they're really text files. But it's really another security mechanism out there that helps you to prevent confidentiality, integrity. I would argue that it helps you, in particular, integrity, right? Again, the integrity of the election, right? So the integrity of the election, recounts and all that. Well, if you go back to the log file, or sorry, the paper trail, you can verify, right? And then you ensure the integrity. So again, this is another tool or control, if you will, or something, procedure for the pillars. All right, so everything else, I'm not really going to spend too much time on this. As I said, these are very straightforward, not very technical things. You can just take a look, read through these. I don't anticipate to ask many questions about this. This is just an example electronically of what logs look like. You can see
Mr. Calix.
Yeah, go ahead.
Don't mean to interrupt, but I don't know if you're showing like a PowerPoint, but right now we still see your bright space.
Really? You're not seeing the slides? I am. I've been showing a slide.
Yeah, I've just been trying to go along with you orally because I wasn't sure if that was intentional or not.
I'm really sorry. Oh, yeah. This will be over in like 6 months. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah. So I was showing these slides. Do you guys see them?
Yeah, we see them now.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. They're on Brightspace. They're the security auditing ones. So you can see this is what I had said, the definitions. Okay, and so as I said, you can read through these. And then I was here, basically. I was just showing, this is an example of a log file in, this is an example of a log file in Linux, for instance, and you can see here, it just shows, users, dates and times, the activity. So it looks like email. And then you can see here the login, who logged in, who rebooted, who shut down the system. So you can see all of that. And that's really what this is about, the audit trail. Could be, paper trail, like the voting machines, could be electronic, like on Linux. At the end of the day, it's just something that can help you to maintain integrity of your information, because you can always look back and take a look at it and see what has happened. All right. So that's really the general idea there. Everything else, protecting audit trails, all that, you can read through it. And, as I said, in 372, we will look at this topic, UNIX and Syslog. So this is a 372 topic because in system administration, logging is certainly an important thing, not just from a security point of view, but just as a general administrative thing. So you can figure out what has happened, et cetera. Debugging, basically. So yeah, just take a look at this just slightly. I don't anticipate too many questions, but certainly read through that one as well. Any questions? I'm sorry about the not having the slides. Any questions about him?
No, it seems pretty straightforward.
All right. So those are, you know, just little miscellaneous topics that I have kind of left, and I'm trying to touch on all of them. So there's not a lot of depth in these. So we talked about security auditing. We talked about physical security. So we're done with this module. And then we talked about IDS already. So I'm pretty sure I went over these slides, finished RCM. And that really just leaves then the last, so this is really the module that I wanted to kind of look at today, which is denial of service and malware. And so if you think about it, we said at the beginning of the semester that the principles of information assurance were, you know, confidentiality, integrity, availability, non-repudiation, authentication, right? So those were the main ones. Sometimes people throw other ones, and then we talked about a few other related things. However, one principle you may have noticed all semester that we haven't really addressed is availability, right? So we talked about integrity, confidentiality, authentication, mainly as it relates to cryptography, but we didn't really talk about the principle of availability. So that's usually this last one that I'm going to cover here. And that's, you know, availability, we all understand, is that the resources of the computer are available, right? So usually then, when we talk about availability, that principle will talk about, well, you know, what's the situation? The situation is that you have a computer that you want to reach, let's say a server, right? Or your laptop, or what else? Your router, maybe. A website somewhere, which is a web server in the background. Okay, so what would be some reasons why you cannot access, let's say, your laptop, a server, a website, you know, Brightspace, YouTube, you know, that kind of thing. So let's talk a little bit about that. And again, this time I'm going to share some slides. Right, this time I need to make sure I'm sharing this. All right. So I think somebody said something. Let's see. DNS server down. Okay. Forgetting the password. Well, if you forget the password of your laptop, you can access it. That's true. But that's also related to authentication, correct? You know, because it's really not that the computer is available. You just can't authenticate. So it's good. You know, a password is an authentication type of thing, just like your biometrics, right? So nowadays, a lot of computers have this, you know, biometrics. I think phones, for instance, you take a picture of your face, you know, you have that available at least. Somebody said DNS server down. Why is it down though? Sure, you can get to the website, and that's certainly the problem, but why is the server down, the DNS server? Okay, service provider outage. Why is the service provider out? Right, so because of technical issues, right? The company just, you know, they did an update, right? They did an update, and that's usually a reason. They did an update, and they have to reverse it back. Power outage, sure. You know, a tree knocks down a cable. It goes back to the physical things. What else? What else could make your laptop, your PC at home, your server not be available and affect the principle of availability? PC broken, okay. So you dropped it and it broke, that's sure. All right, the DDoS attack. What is a DDoS attack? Denial of service, right? So, okay, let's remember that one. Any other reasons why your computer So availability could also mean that files, certain files in your computer are not available, right? So for instance, you might be able to log in, get to the computer, but let's say that you get to the computer, but you can't get to the files that you wanted, or the computer just, you know, you get the blue screen of death, right? And, you know, you can't get to the file. So hardware issues, yeah, corrupt hard drive. These are, okay, router needs a reboot, sure. What's another reason, a common reason? At least this used to be more common in the past. I think it happens less so. Software update, sure, we said that. One more. Have you guys heard of, for instance, people asking you for money to give you a password so that you can de-encrypt the files that they encrypted in your system? So, you know, you have some files in your system, somebody did something, they get encrypted, and now they're asking, yeah, ransomware, right? Ransomware, exactly. And ransomware is a type of, what is it? What is the general term for ransomware? So not phishing. Phishing could be, but phishing is attempting to do other things as well. A virus, right? It's based on it's a virus. Ransomware is malware, right? So malware, right? So malware, you know, used to be that malware would get on your computer and it just crashed completely and you lost everything. Or ransomware has been the situation where people use encryption to get in your computer somehow. And when they do that, they just encrypt your files. Obviously, you can't decrypt them without the key, and so they ask you for money. So that, you know, that's the idea. So that's what today really is about, right? So it's about that last pillar, availability. You know, kind of last one. We're not going to do a lab. Obviously, we just don't have time for that last pillar, you know, to do a lab. But I will point you to a couple of labs that you might, you know, you might actually just do them over the winter break just for fun. You know, I don't know. So if you guys have interest in doing things just for fun, I'm sure you can do it. So there's a couple of labs in the seed labs. One is for denial of service, and one is for malware, right? Malware of Android phones, I believe, something like that. But they have an emulator, so you don't actually have to put a virus or malware on your phone. Don't do that. Never do that. So use some kind of an emulator just to kind of get the idea of it, right? So anyway, that's what these slides are for. So before I get into the slides, I'll point out the labs, and you guys can, you know, take a look at it if you want. As I said, you know, obviously we're out of time for this semester, but on your own, there's no reason why you can't do these things. So you might find it interesting. All right, so I probably need to share. All right, so if you're at the, all right, so I'm going to close this chat. All right, so if you're here at the Seed Labs, you should be seeing the Seed Labs website. All right, and I'm just going to point out a few. It's the same VM. And you can see here there should be, under network security, there should be. Some of these will do in 454, but there should be, or at least there used to be. Huh, okay. Maybe system security, nope. It's not in cryptography. All right, let's look at the mobile security. So certainly here, this Android repackaging lab and this Android device rooting lab. So this one in particular, insert malicious code inside an existing Android app and repackage it. So this lab you can take a look at. if you'd like, as I said, this is up to you, but it is related to malware. Yeah, there you go. So this is related to in March 2011, it was found that the Droid Dream Trojan had been embedded into more than 50 apps in Android official market and had infected many users. So you can see it's, it has to do with that. Right, so this is a lab that you can take a look at related to malware. And I think there used to be a denial of service attack lab, but I guess it's been updated. It's probably just been added into one of these, I want to say. We'll do this at some point in throughout the semester, I'm sure. But I'll talk today about denial of service and how you can do that. All right. Anyway, so just wanted to point that out. All right. So let's go back to the slides then. See that there. All right. So you should now be seeing. You should be seeing the slides. Okay. So as I said, really, I should change probably these slides. As you can see here, I talk about malware, but I also talk about denial of service attacks. I really should rename these slides not just availability, right? So really, it should be availability, as in the availability pillar, right, of information assurance. So I've already kind of motivated, we went over the discussion in the chat of various things that can affect availability. You guys talked about how power company could go out, corruption, certainly. But some people mentioned denial of service, so we'll mention that, and malicious software, which you guys can see over here. All right, so we'll start with that. So what is malicious software? So a lot of you've always known about this, right? Whenever you've had a computer, you probably, maybe had a situation with malware, or, there's, malware, spamware, ransomware, spyware, all these kinds of names, right? All these kinds of names. At the end of the day, all of these are really the same. They're just really code. Any code, by the way. It doesn't have to be just some strange binary or anything. So it's basically any code that has a specific type of behavior is malware. That's really all you have to worry about or understand. So for instance, we could write a Python script and make it into malware, right? Because why? It's really just a Python script, but it would behave like malware. So what are the properties, without looking at the slides? What would be let's say that we just want to define malware. And I'm going to use another color for this because the contrast I've noticed on these slides is not very good. Let me see how I can do that. Hold on. Just give me a second. I need to change. Okay, let me see. Does that look better?
We don't see anything yet.
You don't see anything? Oh,
No.
sorry. I'm trying to change the color of this pen.
There we go. We're able to see now.
let's see this one. Better, right? That looks better, I think, because white on blue looks okay.
Yeah, that looks a lot better.
Somebody wrote something. All right, so now I'm gonna share the screen again, and hopefully this will look a lot better. All right, so what happened? Okay. All right, better. All right, finally. All right, so malware, right? So what are some properties of malware? Without looking at the slides, if you had to define, you know, malware is code. We know that, right? We know it's code. But really, what is the behavior of malware, of a virus, Trojan, whatever it is, of that? So first of all, I've said any code, you know, JavaScript, you know, from your 110, or Python, Perl, you know, C, C++, Java, you know, any language is code and could be made into, you know, a virus, malware. So what would be the behavior?
Really anything that compromises the pillars, any of the pillars.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay. So that's the negative objective, right? That's usually referred to as the payload, because a virus will deliver a payload, right? So for instance, in ransomware, they'll encrypt the files and then they require money from you in order for you to get the key, right? So that basically means that they've affected what? The availability of your files, right? Not the integrity. They couldn't change it. They haven't read it, let's say, but they affect the availability. So certainly there's that idea of payload. But what else is there? Because you could have malware, basically code that has specific behavior but just has no payload. So it doesn't actually do anything bad, but it is still behaving like a virus or like an internet worm or one of those. So it is technically, you know, a virus, malicious, which actually the term here, malicious software, right? So what else would malicious software do? What else does a virus or a computer worm or one of those, what else do they actually try to do? Any ideas? So what's one thing that a virus does? What's the problem with COVID?
It can spread.
It spreads, right? Exactly, it spreads. So it spreads, right? So it replicates, exactly. And that's it. That's actually a good word, replicate. So that, you know, that's why it's called a computer virus, right? Malware. Because yes, it can have a payload or not, right? In a way, I mean, in a way like COVID, you know, it's contagious, but not everybody will get hurt, for instance. So that's sort of, it's bad. I hate to use that analogy, but you know, it's somewhat the idea that you can have code, malware, and it basically is just code that definitely tries to replicate, but it doesn't necessarily have payload. So there's actually, what this means is that there's two elements to this when you have a computer virus. The first one is that it's going to try to get on the computer and it's going to try to make copies of itself. So it's going to find another file, something, and add a copy of itself to that file, so that when you run that other file, guess what? It's going to try to find other files, you know, and that kind of thing. That's the idea. So, for instance, a very famous virus from like a decade ago, 8 years ago, Stuxnet. I don't know if you guys ever heard of that, but it was a computer virus, and the idea was that they would, in a flash drive, they would put the program. Whenever you added the flash drive to a computer, it would try to, it would initiate, make a copy of itself on that laptop, look for other computers, you know, if it made a connection to other computers, you know, to get a copy of itself in those. But in that sense, all it was doing, it was replicating, right? It wasn't really releasing a payload because it wasn't attacking every computer. Stuxnet was only designed to attack a specific type of a computer called a PLC, which stands for Programmable Logic Controller. And these are computers that are used in like industry, like in factories and power plants and those kinds of things. And so the reason what it wanted to do is that, you know, it was looking for laptops, and these laptops were used by engineers to program these PLCs. So basically what the engineers needed to have on the laptop is a special type of software, right? So they had a program. And I can't remember the program, but it's the program that is the standard one for programming these PLCs. It escapes my mind right now. But that program is, you know, it's just like if you, let's say you want to build a website, right? So, okay, so you need Visual Studio for it. Or, you know, you want to, you know, do something else, you know, play a game. You have to have that program of the video game. So that's what the malware was doing. So Stuxnet was trying, but first of all, without delivering a payload, it was just moving to computers. It would check the computer. If the computer didn't have the program that it needed, it didn't do anything, and it would just try to replicate. So that meets the objective of replication. However, whenever it found a computer that had that program, then it inferred, okay, that computer probably all these botnets and everything, they're all malware. They're all malware. Malicious software is really the general term. Okay, so again, what I'm trying to say is here, what is malware or malicious software? It is only code, any code of any type, JavaScript, you know, doesn't matter, on a website, you know, a virus can spread on a what do you call it, on a social media site like Facebook or MySpace or all of those, right? It doesn't just have to be in an operating systems like Windows or Linux or Mac or a phone. You know, it can be on a website itself or the internet, because all that malware is at the end of the day is that it is a code. That's what I'm trying to say to you guys, that meets specific type of behavior, right? And that's really what defines it. And so one of the behaviors that it must have is the ability to replicate, and then sometimes to deliver the payload, which this example of Stuxnet is the one I'm giving you. With Stuxnet, basically, the idea is that it was replicating from computer to computer, right, until it found a specific program that connected to PLCs. Whenever it found that program, then it would deliver the payload to that program, so that program would write code to the PLCs, because the PLCs are like a computer, but they're running plants and things. So imagine if you have a PLC that controls a spinning machine. You know, you guys have seen probably like the Hoover Dam or one of those big dams, and they have these big engines, right? You know, these big things, generators, and they're spinning really fast, but that cycle and all that, you know, is highly controlled by sensors. And what would happen if somebody added some code in the controller, and now it just increases the speed of that device by 20%? Do you see where I'm going with this, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's really the idea, okay? So anyway, so malware then, whenever you think about it, think of it as something that replicates, has a behavior, but also delivers a payload. Okay, so that's kind of the introduction there. All right. No, I can't. Okay, that's staying there. Okay. Hold on. I changed the pen. Now it just doesn't want to. All right. So let's continue then. So here we have, basically now we have a formal definition. Malware is a program that is inserted into a system, usually covertly, with the intent of compromising the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the victim's data, applications, and or operating system, or otherwise just annoying or disrupting the victim. Okay, so that's really the definition there. And in particular, as I said, you know, we're focusing on availability today. So, you know, malware terminology, you know, really all these things. So somebody asked me, like, what's a bot and everything. So here we have some definitions, right? So when we talk about malicious software, got the word virus, the word worm, and the word zombie, bot, etc. But they're really just, again, the definition is that they're just code, but they're code that meets certain conditions that we define already, like it tries to replicate in some way, or it tries to deliver a payload. So let's look at the classic term, virus, right? So that's malware that, when executed, tries to replicate itself into other executable machine or script code, just another Python script, let's say. When it succeeds, the code is said to be infected. When the infected code is executed, the virus also executes. All right, another term is computer worm. That's a computer program that can run independently. Okay, so it doesn't basically need to infect another program. So a computer program that can run independently and can propagate a complete working version of itself onto other hosts on a network, usually by exploiting software vulnerabilities in the target system. So a good example of this is what is called the XSS worm, which is in JavaScript. So it's just basically some JavaScript code, and this JavaScript code, you know how you go into a message board and you post something, right? So you guys, I'm sure you've all left comments, you put comments on a website. Well, what if you put JavaScript in there? What would happen? Well, if not properly validated, that JavaScript, when somebody runs it on the browser, could run and do things. And one of the things it could do is make a copy of itself and post another post in another area of the social media site. Then somebody visits that area, click on that, and guess what? It runs in the browser, and then it makes a copy of itself and it posts in another place. And so it basically replicates, right? It replicates. And again, maybe it doesn't do any payload, but it just copies itself. So another definition, zombie and bots, right? So this is a program activated on an infected machine that is activated to launch attacks on other machines. So this would be, you know, a specific machine. That's why it's called a zombie machine. And the zombie machine then will do attacks on other machines. Sometimes there's a remote control of it and so on. But at the end of the day, they're all really the same idea, right? So they're trying to replicate in some way, whether they infect some file or they're independent, and then they'll try to deliver, and then they have various communication capabilities. And as you can see here, I'm not going to go through all of these, but there's actually, you can read through them. There's a lot of them: adware, attack kit, and you know all of these. I'm sure some of these you've seen already. Rootkit, Trojan, spyware. You know, I would argue adware. You guys know what adware is? What's adware? Can anyone tell me?
Isn't it just something that kind of bombards you with different ads and everything like that?
Yeah, all the ads, right? I don't know if you guys know this, but there's not spam ads, actually. Spam ads, it's not just spam ads. It's just adware. The Google, your favorite website, right? Has something like one click, something double one click. It's all of these, Facebook, all these companies, they've invested heavily in advertisement. That's how they make their money. And adware nowadays, I would actually argue that it should be in this list because it is malware in one sense, okay? So adware is what? It's basically, I think there's like 200 companies in total, and they do this whole adware thing. And what they're doing is they're harvesting your private information, right, to basically give you targeted ads. And the problem with this is that it's intrusive. It doesn't, they own so you don't have privacy, right? So there's an argument that privacy is affected, and technically privacy is confidentiality of your data, correct? So if you think about it from the point of view of you as a human, you also have, you know, not just a computer system should have the principles of information assurance, right? You should also, as a person, have a right to, you know, privacy and all that, confidentiality. And so the adware machine that supports all of Google and everything, certainly is a problem because they're not really respecting privacy issues. I mean, it's well known that, you know, you guys, they you know, a lot of data has been harvested through Facebook and everything. So there's certainly big issues with that. So that could be another one. At the end of the day, it's not that they're necessarily trying to corrupt your data, but it affects that pillar of confidentiality, and it meets the criteria. It's software. I mean, just because, you know, it's just some software, and, you know, they definitely want to be in there, right? They definitely want to be in there to make money, but that money that they make is by making your private data, either selling it to third parties or using it for targeted ads. And so there's an issue with that. And yeah, somebody said, I think Europe has stronger laws on information security. Absolutely. So California also has a little bit more. So that's probably in the next, you know, it'll take time probably, but, you know, that's something that needs to be debated strongly. So obviously Google needs to make money, and that, you know, that definitely makes sense, but there's also this issue, right? So it's really your right, and so it's not even for me to say, but it's the right that you guys have, and so you need to make a decision, right? You know, do you want those pillars to apply to you as well or not? All right. So certainly, what's, you know, legislation is a game changer in something like this, because unlike the other ones, you can argue, unlike all of these, adware is different in the sense that they do comply with the law. right? So these will break the law, right? So these will break the law. Adware, because it's a revenue stream reported in taxes and everything, they obviously have to comply with the law. So legislation would certainly affect them. Okay. So that's correct. All right. So anyway, hopefully this makes sense. You know, as I said, you know, today's just, this is the last topic. We're just kind of having a nice discussion here. It's actually interesting. I want to say there's so for those of you that have an interest in this, this is kind of an aside. It's not going to be on the test, right? But there's a book out there. I think it's called The End of Google. I strongly recommend. And I'm not against Google or anything by any chance. I like them. I'm just saying these are interesting ideas that you guys, you know, you're the internet generation, right? So you really need to think about these things a little bit more carefully. There's a very interesting book out there. It's called, I think, The End of Google. If you're interested in the exact name and can't find it, just send me an email. I'll send you the link. But the book is really interesting because it talks about this very thing, how adware, you know, is a type of malware because of what we talked about privacy issues. But what's the solution, right? Because the thing is, adware gives us free YouTube, and although with a lot of commercials, it used to be that YouTube had some commercials. Now it's just terrible. But so Google, YouTube, Facebook, all these companies, obviously they provide something, Twitter, right? They provide information that you want, certainly content, but the price of it is adware. So really what this book talks about, it's not that Google's gonna end, it's really I think the name was just meant to be sensational, but it really talks about what will be the future? What will be the future if you didn't, because you need, if without adware, there's no money. And without any money, Google cannot create or support the content that it supports, right? So there's gotta be some financial stream coming in. So what I find interesting about that book is that it talks about cryptography as being the solution, because although we didn't talk about it, about this topic in this class, there's the whole blockchain idea, right? So blockchain and cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, is that the other one? Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and blockchain. So all of that uses hash functions, basically, hash algorithms to create unique things. And so a lot of people just believe that through that, your data will be secured under that model, right? Yeah. So your data will somehow be secured through encryption. That's kind of the idea. And then obviously without adware though, we will move into a model which is already there. Like YouTube, you can subscribe to it and then you watch it without ads. But the problem is YouTube, you can guarantee that they're still harvesting your data, so your privacy is not there. So it might be a combination of legislation, as somebody said, there's legislation in Europe, so certainly stronger legislation here, but also some kind of cryptography to make sure that your data is secure. So for instance, right now, I don't know, have you guys heard of What's Up? Have you heard of that app? Have any of you heard of it? What's Up? Yes, all right, so What's Up? Have you guys heard of another one called Signal? What about Signal?
Yes.
Okay, so you have heard of Signal, good. So what do you guys know about those two? What's the difference between the two?
Signal is more privacy focused.
More privacy focused. It's Signal, right? So if I don't, yeah. So Signal is, sorry. What's Up is basically Facebook's, right? And What's Up basically, although people are not reading your text messages, they are basically looking at the keywords, tying that to commercials, right? So there's that whole ecosystem exists. Whereas Signal is not a company-driven product or application, right? It's a type of WhatsUp, but driven by a foundation. So it's open source, everything, because as we've talked many times, we don't abstract the code. We rely on the security of the keys to provide, cryptography, secure cryptography. And you should know that after this class. So basically then Signal really does provide, because of that, right? It tries to provide at least a secure infrastructure where your information is more secure and certainly not being harvested for commercials. And so that kind of provides, so that's kind of the idea with that book that I mentioned, what is it, the Life After Google, that basically to move away from adware and the fact that it affects privacy, solution might be something like Signal, where it's some kind of cryptography to really independently protect your data. Plus, you have to pay a subscription to have the service. You see that? So, but anyway, I think that it all ties in really well to a lot of this, and it's probably something to look at in the future because maybe a lot of innovation will come in that field. All right. Any questions? Make sense?
Yeah, seems to make sense.
All right, great. All right, so we can move on then. So with these slides, we're pretty much, let's see where we are. So classification, they can be, malware can be classified based on how it spreads or propagates, and then on the actions or payloads that it takes. So I talked about those two ideas, like replicate versus and payloads. And it can also be classified based on those that need a host program, those that are independent, like worms, malware that does not replicate, like spam email, right? And malware that does replicate, like viruses and worms. So there's many classifications, but basically I would say generally it wants to replicate and it wants to deliver a payload. All right, so everything else, you guys can read through these. I don't need to read through all of these. We've talked about the definitions, so that you can just read through these. Now, this is one thing I did wanted to talk a little bit about, and that's the idea of the code for malware. Okay, code for malware. So let's take a look at this code in front of us. And basically that should meet the conditions of a simple malware program. So here we have a program V, right? You can see that there. And then basically it's got several subroutines. But really, you can see here that the key thing is that V is a copy of the entire thing. So V is a copy of the entire thing. And then somewhere in the code, you have this. Prepend V to file. And that just means that it's going to make a copy of itself. So that is the replication aspect of the code. And this will be accomplished in multiple ways, depending on the programming language that you're using, of course. Okay. All right. So then after that, the other subroutines might be, do some damage. And then there might be a trigger. So for instance, a date. Let's say that you set something in the, I will on December 24th or December 25th, do the attack. So there's a function for the trigger, and then there's a function for the payload trigger, the payload, and then the replication, right? So that's generally the logic of a virus, the structure, let's say, of a malware program. Does this make sense, guys?
Yeah.
And that's it. I mean, there's really, I'm not going to get into writing the code for malware. You can easily write it in Python. You just have to update, find some files in the system. You know, you select, do a search of the files in the system that you want to target, maybe by extension, so .txt files, etc. And then you go in there and you have a copy of the virus, so you store it in some variable, and then you write it to the file, assuming you have permissions and everything, obviously. So that's why the principle of least privilege, those things are important, because if you don't have access to changing a file, you know, obviously you cannot change it. But anyway, so this is the basic structure of the code. That's really all I wanted to show you of that. Okay, this is just another example. All right, and then computer worms, I already talked about one of these. I talked about the Morris worm, actually. Okay. Oh, there it is again. All right, and then, you know, that's basically just some keylogger spyware. That's just the same thing we've talked about. Countermeasures, maybe we should mention a little bit. So obviously we all know that computers have antivirus scanners. We talked about controls the other day. There's actually, maybe I should say, there's at least two types of countermeasures, or let's call them malware scanners. Okay, so there's basically two types of them, at least. Let me just see here. All right, so there's a lot of ways, obviously. Actually, let's just, generally speaking, the ideal solution to the threat of malware is, you know, prevention, policy, awareness, vulnerability mitigation, reduce vulnerabilities, threat mitigation. But if prevention fails, technical mechanisms can be used to support, such as detection, identification, and removal, right? So that's basically the famous malware scanners. And really, these can be divided based on two things at least. So we can think of scanners as two types, static and dynamic. So static scanners, we talked about them already, right? So who can tell me? We talked about them, I think, last week. Remember, what was the definition of a malware scanner that is static? What does it do?
It looks for the hash of known malware and compares it to whatever it encounters to see if it matches.
Right, exactly. So it's got a list of hashes of files that are known virus, and then if it finds it, because it's in a list, it's a known virus, so, you know, deletes it, removes it, etc. What if the virus, so we know that the definition of a virus is that it's going to try, you know, make a copy of its code to another code. But what if the virus, so we have a hash, call it hash1, and then we have hash2, right? We have hash1 and hash2. What if it copies the entire file exactly from here to here, but it just changes one bit of it. It changes one bit of the file from A to B. It just changes one bit. And then you recalculate the hash of that new copy. I mean, it just changed one bit. Is the hash going to be, so I'm going to give you three options, A, B, and C. So is the hash going to be the same? Is the hash going to be slightly different? Or C, is the hash going to be entirely different? What would you say? see, right? That's what we did in one of the labs. We saw that even if we just change one bit of the file using ghex, we actually only ended up with slight. Oh, sorry, sorry. We ended up with a complete variation of the hash number, completely different one, because a hash function takes a variable length input, converts it into a fixed length input, but it should be a very unique number. That is actually called polymorphism, or those are called polymorphic viruses, which are viruses that whenever they do, we were talking about the behavior, they want to deliver a payload, they have a trigger possibly, they will have a replication mechanism. By the way, when they're doing the replication, they will randomly change something, some value. So because they know that that new text file with that new value randomly will not be the same hash value. Therefore, the antivirus, the static antivirus scanner will not work. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
What about then? So how do you deal with polymorphic viruses then? Let's say that you go work for a cybersecurity company and your boss says, deal with malware. So you tell them, well, I'm going to do static. But then they're going to say, oh, it's a polymorphic virus. Or maybe we've never seen it in the wild. What could you do then? To try, I'm not saying you have to be 100% successful, but at least to begin to try to detect and stop that virus, what could you possibly do you think? Any ideas? That obviously that's probably what I call dynamic here, right? Dynamic analysis. But before I tell you, I just want to see what you guys think about what that could possibly be. How would you tackle this problem? What do you guys think?
Like scanning for the general structure of the code, just like how you were pointing out earlier, how viruses and malware have to meet certain criteria, but they are just at the end of the day code.
Yeah, that's actually not, it's a good idea, right? So you're going to look for something that tries to make connections, right? Tries to
duplicate or replicate or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. Now, however, some programs do validly make connections, right? Or can actually do certain things validly. So you're automating this process, right? So if I understand correctly, you're saying, and don't analyze the hash file anymore, but analyze the file itself, like the actual code, and try to find certain function calls or certain things, correct?
Yeah, just commonalities with that viruses have or whatnot.
Yeah, and that makes sense. So that's actually looking at the code itself. And I think, in a sense, you're right, because that's actually going into what dynamic analysis does. So with dynamic analysis, what happens is, and let me just switch to the whiteboard, it might be easier. Right on there. I still can't figure out how to change that color. All right, so in dynamic analysis, dynamic malware analysis, what you end up, so the problem that we have is polymorphic viruses, right? So hash is out of the question. You're saying analyze two files, file 1, file 2, and then if there's a function, it's not going to be called replicate, but if like you saw that, right, you would say, or you saw that code that resembles that, you would then flag it, right? That's the idea. Another way of doing it is actually this one. It's pretty interesting. So basically, viruses are programs that run, correct? It's code that's running. So it's like an executable or it's script that's running. It's created a process, but it's basically you understand or agree that these files are going to run, right, guys?
Right.
Right. So let's say we take an environment like the operating system. So we have the operating system, the OS, right? And we have basically here the program, whatever the computer virus is running. So that means, so what happens when and this is where the dynamic part comes in. Whenever you have, let's call it malware and goodware, right? So goodware would be, let's say that you run the calculator in your Windows operating system or the notepad or one of those. They're basically little programs, a process they're running in the background, right? The same thing with malware. It's a little program that's running in the background. So the difference, or rather the thing that they have in common is that they're performing actions, correct? So they might be doing what? They'll be doing registry edits. They might be doing writing to file. They might be doing network connections. They might be writing to a log. They might be doing this and that, right? They're going to be, and one thing that they do a lot of is they're importing DLLs, right? So like, DLLs are like these linked libraries that have additional code that they might use for various tasks. So that's where the dynamic comes in the fact that you actually don't, so your idea was to just statically analyze the text, the files for structure. This one, the dynamic analysis, basically, dynamic analysis of viruses or malware is the fact that you are actually running the virus, but obviously in a sandbox of some kind. So that's the first thing. And so basically you run this like on a separate computer in an emulator of the operating system in a sandbox environment, so that you can't, it can cause damage if it has a payload. But you run both goodware and malware. What's going to happen is, let's say they both run for a second. During that second, they're going to perform actions, right? Various actions. And all of those actions can be logged. So you create a log of all the actions associated with, let's call it malware 1, goodware 2. So this would be malware 1 file. It's that one. Goodware 2 is that file, the log file. So this is the output of running the code. The code runs. As it's running, if you run a program, you log, right? You log things. So if you have a program, it logs the information. Well, that's the same thing with dynamic scanners. They'll run in an emulator in a sandbox environment. They will run the process, all actions, DLLs, registry edits, read files, anything else, ... will be recorded. And both of them will have DLLs, will make network connections, will write to files, etc. They will all do the same things. However, that's where you go back to your idea, right? Of checking, how you wanted to check the structure of the code statically. Well, you can do the same with this. So this will call DLL 46. This might call DLL 37. So they're calling different DLLs, but it might turn out that at some point, malware files have a pattern in common that is different from the pattern of goodware. They have more network connections associated with DLL 46 for whatever reason. That's obviously, that's to the cybersecurity specialist to analyze this, but this is the idea of dynamic analysis. Because obviously here, what's important here is that it's not about the code, because what the bad guy can do in your idea of analyzing the code is that they can try to obscure it, right? They can try to obscure the code in some way that makes it very difficult for you to spot, that what they're trying to do. Here, you kind of bypass that whole hiding of the code. So here they might be hiding the code. You bypass all of that because you actually end up, here on this side, right on this side, you end up running the code itself. So you don't actually care about the code anymore. You care, so it's not about the hash of the file, or it's not about the code and what's written there statically. It's about the code running on the sandbox environment in the operating system. The code will perform some actions, obviously, and then those actions get recorded in logs, and then you analyze those logs and hopefully find some kind of negative behavior. Is this clear, guys?
Yeah,
All right. Any questions?
I don't think so.
Oh, all right, good. So let's go back then to the finish up the slot. Let's finish up the slides. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. And now, so then in conclusion, we talked about malware, talked about the ideas of malware, and then we talked about some of the countermeasures and the controls like malware, static, and dynamic. Remember, all of this is to protect the pillars. In particular, today I'm using these examples to talk about availability a little bit. All right, so that is that. And then the rest, you can just read through it, you know, just for your own information. Some examples there of software, etc. All right, so now the last topic is denial of service attack. This is sometimes called distributed denial of service attack, SYN flooding, etc. So you can easily do a denial of service attack. When you guys take ITS 454, you can, it's the network security class. I'll show you a tool called, I forget the name, NetWag, NetWalks and NetWag. It's a very simple tool that you can use to launch many types of attacks. You can also, network attacks in particular, and also you can just really do it in Python. In Python, I'll show you guys how we can just create packets and send them out into the network, right? We just need access to the network card, which you do by having root privileges on your Linux machine. And so then, or sudoer. And so basically we can just generate packets, put them in the line, and do any kind of denial of service attack that we want. So really, what is a denial of service attack? So that's really what we need to talk about just a little bit. So I'm not gonna get too much into the technical details, as this is a topic that, as I said, I'll cover in another course, or it'll be covered in another course. And so let's just read a formal definition of a denial of service attack here. So we know denial of service, or DOS, you know, it affects a pillar, availability, is an action that prevents or impairs the authorized use of networks, systems, or applications by exhausting resources, such as the central processing unit, the CPU, the memory, the bandwidth, the disk space. Okay, so that's really the general idea of this. Okay, so you're affecting availability by taking away the resources of that you have available. So so that basically being said, you can read through the rest of the slides. I will just talk about one example. So basically what I'm talking about is written here in the slides. So read through it, but I will just talk about it in the whiteboard. It's just easier for me to write this down. So, and just, you know, it's just a general definition of what, so you should be seeing the whiteboard now. So denial of service is quite simply what? So DOS attack you're trying to exhaust the resources. So in this case, a computer system, you know, like a Linux machine, usually has what is called the TCP three-way handshake, right? So that's, you know, one type. So this is one type of an example. So usually that TCP three-way handshake is an exchange of packets between a server and a client. Between a server and a client, right? So there's an exchange of packets, you know, right? That's going to happen. And this exchange of packets allows you to establish a connection, right? It allows you to establish a connection. Now, the server on here will have a buffer. A buffer is a variable, right? A variable in memory, a certain allocated amount of space in memory. So what happens with the denial of service attack is that the attacker creates multiple packets, you know, thousands of packets, which have spoofed IP addresses for the source. So they're just pretending to be from all over the world, and they send these packets, and usually what they do is they send this packet, but they never send the last one, right? So what happens to the server is that the server, every time this is happening, is saving in memory the information it has because it's waiting for this last packet to arrive. So it doesn't want, it has like a half-open connection, right? It doesn't have an established connection. It just has what is called like a halfway open connection. And then, because you're flooding it with thousands and thousands of these, guess what? You end up with many, many half-open connections. And then what happens when you reach the limit? When you reach the limit, the server can no longer process anymore. And so now when a valid, a legitimate connection comes into it, right? That legitimate connection cannot be established because it's already filled up. So there's no, you know, nowhere to go. It's already filled up. Do you see that? So that's the classic example of DDoS attacks. Does that make sense, guys? Just a very quick, easy explanation of this. You know, our last topic, really, but that's the idea. All right, are there any questions?
I don't have any, at least.
Just if you want more details about it, just go through this. Just go through the slides, basically. But you know, this is really kind of the general view of the topic. And so, you know, in conclusion today, you know, we talked about availability, and we talked about some of the things that could affect availability, like malware and denial of service. And we talked a little bit about the control. So obviously with denial of service, one of the things that you can do is, you know, have a bigger buffer. Also, you know, drop connections after a period of time so that the buffer doesn't fill up. Because, you know, usually these connections are fast, right? So there's no reason why they should stay open for a very long time. And then there's actually a few techniques like something called SYN cookies. And SYN cookies, what it is, and again, funny enough, it uses cryptography, right? A type of hash function. So the SYN cookie is basically a way that the server can take the connection, encrypt it somehow, right? Encrypt that information, send that information, send that information to the client, responds back with that same hash, then it means that the server has seen it again, right? So it can trust it. So that's basically the idea. It's able to, by sending that hash value in there, it knows that that hash came from the original connection. And then therefore, when it receives the third packet, if it contains that hash and everything checks out, it allows it in. So it's a way that by doing that mechanism, so basically in essence, instead of storing the information in the buffer, right? So instead of storing the information in the buffer, it puts a hash of that in the packet itself, sends it back, but it drops it from here. So it doesn't retain it. When it gets it back, all the information is in the packet. If the hash checks out, it knows that it came from, it came from me, right? It came from the server, so it can complete the three-way handshake. That's usually called a SYN cookie. I believe it's just a type of mechanism, if I remember correctly. That's the name, and it's another countermeasure for dealing with DDoS attacks. All right, that's it. That's it for today. As you know, today was the last lecture. So this is the last set of topics that we will cover in the course. And then next Thursday, we will go over, it'll just be an open lab where you guys can come in and, hopefully I would suggest, work on your project, show your project if you have any questions, so that to make sure that you're ready for the presentations on a week from today. All right, guys, so I'll stay for a couple of minutes. Otherwise, we are done. If you have any questions, otherwise, we are done for today, and I will see you guys Thursday. Have a good